Tonight we're going to be talking about the topic of rebuilding the temple. And as we've mentioned before, we've been in this general area of the Depression years for 3 meetings now, and we'll divide this session up into two sessions and then try to move on after that to another area of the Scottish Rite history. So here we go. Scottish Rite in McAlester during the 1930s was all about the building, the temple, the largest building on the highest elevation in the city, and the economic depression that arrived at the most inappropriate time. The elation of the members, the fulfillment of their dreams, and then the dark cloud of the Great Depression played havoc with their great financing scheme. It makes for a great story now, and we are the second, third, and fourth generations of Masons who have benefited from this blood, sweat, and tears of our forefather Masons. Due to their fortitude, hard work, and perseverance, they have left us with the legacy of a great temple. So let's take a look at this story. In the 1920s, McAlester, a city of 12,000 people in southeastern Oklahoma, had a Scottish Rite membership, valley-wise, that rivaled much larger metropolitan cities of Los Angeles, St. Louis, and Kansas City. In 1922, we were in 3rd place in membership in the whole southern jurisdiction, behind only Guthrie with 11,196 members, Dallas with 8,286 members, and then we came in 3rd place with 7,218 members. This was in 1922. By 1928, we had moved on up into the 8,000 mark. Let me give you a comparison of new members stats with the Roaring 20s, and comparing the Roaring 20s with the Depression 30s in the McAlester consistory, known then as Indian consistory. I've got a handout here. Let me hand those out. You can follow with me on this as if you'll note on these statistics, they're really quite amazing. In 1920, the largest new member year in the history of the McAlester Valley, you'll notice that we have 1,775 new members, 1,775 new members in 1 year. And in 1921 was a close follow-up. We had over 1,000 members again. And in 1922, you can see on down through there, we ended up during the course of the 20s with new members of 6,380 people. And during the 30s, then you can see the comparison with when the Depression hit, we ended up with 1,064. Membership figures, now the figures are from 1920 to 1932 are official. I've got them. Now the ones from 1933 on, I had to go upstairs to the area where all of the pictures of the candidates are and count the numbers. And what I did was I counted all the people in the picture, and then I subtracted the number. I'd go back and count the Scottish Rite hats, and assumed that all of the members wore their hats, and then subtracted that and came up with these figures. So they're approximate, but they've got to be pretty close. You'll notice that the worst year that we had during the Depression was 1933. We had 2 classes that year. During the spring class, we had 11 members, and during the fall class, we had 12, for a total of 23 new candidates for that year. In the years 31 to 39, the largest single class was 77 new members. In other words, that's single class, not for the whole year. And that took place in spring of 1931, and it went down from there. So the years of 1920 and 21, look at those years again. Each one of those years produced more new members than the whole decade of the 1930s. So that'll give you a perspective of where we are on the membership. I tell you another thing that since we've got a little time, let me give you a perspective. I thought that maybe those figures were, in particularly 20 and 21, were maybe out of sync, because these were the years that Guthrie was rebuilding their temple. And I thought, well, maybe they weren't having reunions up there during that construction time, and they sent everybody down here, and so that inflated our figures. But I found that's not true. And so, and then there's another, so this leaves us some reason to investigate this further in the future. But there's another area that during these years, World War I was between 1917 and 1919, I guess you might say. And the Scottish Rite Valleys around over the country would send teams into military bases, and they perform the degrees and allow military people. And this helped. I didn't know whether they tried to pull some of those numbers in. I don't think McAlester did that. If they did, it was pretty minor. But Guthrie really went after it, and they went to military bases and got a lot of members in that manner. So anyway, these figures still are worthy of some further research, but that gives you a perspective of where we are. Okay, let's see if I can get back where I was. As mentioned, at the end of the 1920s, our membership was at the 8,000 mark for membership now, not new members. And at the end of the 1930s, we were down 50%, so to less than 4,000 members. These figures alone tell the story. Membership figures and fraternal organizations equates to sales in the corporate world. We will now take a look at this story from a different perspective. And some of this information you have heard perhaps in previous talks that I've given. As just shown, the 1920s produced prodigious membership numbers, which produced prodigious income, which caused prodigious spending. Following is a listing of the major spending projects during the good times that we had of the 1920s. In 1920, Brother H.L. Muldrow, 33rd degree, past Grand Master and longtime Master of Kadash here in McAlester, brought to the attention of the Lodge of Perfection, who, as you all certainly are aware of, was the business and financial arm of the fraternity, still is to a degree, a situation that was occurring in his home city of Norman. What he brought to us was, he said that due to the state legislature not appropriating enough money to Oklahoma University, there was a dire shortage of dormitory space for students. Norman landowners were adopting the supply and demand formula for room rentals, and they had escalated their prices beyond what many of the students could afford. Muldrow recommended that the LOP, as a public service, help correct this situation. Thereafter, the LOP purchased 2 tracts of land, both one located immediately north of the university's main entrance, and the other less than a block away, for the purpose of building a boys' and a girls' dormitory. This was to help solve the university's housing shortage, at least for sons and daughters of Masons. An Oklahoma City architect by the name of William T. Schmidt was employed. You will recall that name because that's the name that later he was the architect for this building right here, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But anyway, Schmidt drew the plans, and construction was begun on the boys' dormitory. The cornerstone was laid on this building on October 11th, 1920, and was completed in 1921. I have a picture here of, if you're not aware of that, there it is. Yeah. This is really, this building is a sizable building. It's called White Hand Hall now, and it's sitting right there at the entrance of the North Oval at the university. Very, very prime location. Okay, let's see here. Where was I? Okay, the cornerstone was laid October 11th, 1920 and completed in 1921. Originally, it was called the Boys Masonic Dormitory, later Albert Pike Hall, and eventually White Hand Hall. I am sure this is worth some investigation here as to why the name changes through the years. I don't have that information now. It was not built as a moneymaker, only a service to the university students, and it was set up to house 120 boys. Initial rental costs, let me listen to these figures, were $15 a month. So for a 9-month school year, housing cost the student $135 for the whole year. Now, a lodge room was built inside the building, and most of the students were or became demolays when they entered the building. They all had to be sons of Masons, whether they were Scottish Rite Masons or just Blue Lodge Masons, and whether they were McAlester or Guthrie, or anyway, they just had to have a Masonic affiliation and for entrance into the dormitory. Now, the Norman Demolay chapter also met there, and then they eventually formed a fraternity called the Acacia Fraternity, which was it's a nationwide social fraternity for college students, but it is Masonic affiliated. And I don't know whether they're still active or not. I know they're not on the OU campus, but they were at one time.
They were there when you and I were there.
Yeah.
I think there's one at UCO.
Is there? Anyway, so, but anyway, so this was kind of the Masonic headquarters for students in Norman. And so it served a purpose. I'm sure that it directed a lot of those people on into Masonry as they became adults. Now, the girls' dormitory was never built, and the land for that project was sold in 1941. White Hand Hall itself was sold to the university in 1946 and is now housing the OU Administration Department overflow. The main point of this narration was that the cost was $252,000 for a public service. $252,000. That's a lot of money. Before the Norman construction was completed, which a 55-room dormitory project was begun here in McAlester, just south of the Red Brick Temple on 1st Street, to house candidates. This became the Albert Pike Dormitory. I have not located anywhere an exact cost on what the cost was for the dormitory here. However, I think we could estimate it using other figures that we have. It was around $75,000 to $100,000 for that project.
Where was it located, Tom?
It was what was eventually became Albert Pike Hospital,
Oh, okay,
but it's right here, right next to the temple. So the construction was started almost simultaneously with the Norman. So we were in the dormitory business back in 1920-21. In 1922, the original dining hall of the Red Brick Temple was deemed too small. So construction was begun and completed in 1923 for a replacement dining hall. The old dining hall was turned into a lobby. This project was called the West End Extension because the dining hall was placed on the west side, and is located then about where our dining hall is now, to be truthful. So but it was an extension from the original red brick building. And I ran across an exact cost figure for this project, the dining hall, and it was $71,188.14. A few years passed before they undertook the next project. Another public service need popped up in McAlester. The only hospital in town, other than the Catholic hospital, was going out of business. To fill this need, they began a sizable remodeling job of transforming Albert Pike Dormitory into Albert Pike Hospital during the years of 1926 and 27. I have seen one cost figure on that hospital building, and it was listed as $200,000. Now, I don't know truthfully whether this is counting the original cost of the building, which we estimated at $75,000 to $100,000, and they added another $100,000 for the hospital, or whether that was just the remodeling cost. But regardless, this would still be at least another $100,000 or $125,000 that was added to the load that the LOP had taken on during that period of time. The hospital opened in February of 1928. We've already done a talk on that and as to the details. The land was bought on Lake McAlester, and Camp Craig was built. I don't know whether this was funded by the LOP completely or if other organizations were involved in the building of Camp Craig, but I know that the LOP funded it to a certain extent because I've seen listed on a balance sheet the Camp Craig as part of the assets. So along with their regular expenditures for charitable activities, the Albert Pike Lodge of Perfection, representing Indian consistory, had been putting a lot of money in circulation since 1920. Now, here we are at the end of 1928, and they were considering a monumental expenditure. The official terminology for this next project, which was by far going to be the largest undertaking, was the rebuilding of the temple. That's what they called it. They didn't say our new temple, but this is the rebuilding of the temple. And I presume that came from Old Testament wording. I will now endeavor to give you details of the plans that were made to finance this huge construction project. I have accumulated a lot more information than I have had for previous talks. In February of 1928, doors to Albert Pike Hospital had just opened. That same month, February 1928, was the month that the decision to rebuild the temple was made. The building committee was named as follows. A.U. Thomas, who at the time was the SGIG for the state, was the chairman of the building committee. Serving with him were William H. Fuller, Venerable Master, John T. LeBrand, Wise Master, Harry C. Clark, Commander, and H.L. Muldrow, Master. Thus, the committee was the SGIG and the four masters. The SGIG, A.U. Thomas, was a McAlester Mason, and so this would be a natural for him to be involved with the McAlester Temple. A professional fundraising team from New York called Hedrick, Martz, and Lundy were engaged, and the following plan was adopted. They were planning to sell subscriptions of $300 each. The subscription works as a paid-up endowment insurance policy in the amount of $450. No prior health check was required. If the subscriber lives for 21 years, he receives the full amount of the $450. If he dies, his estate receives the $450. And so if you put in 300 and somehow or another you end up getting 450 back. This was the plan. So in later years, the endowment part was changed to 30 years instead of 21, and then it was later eliminated altogether. The subscribers would be joined together in a group policy with the Franklin Life Insurance, and the LOP would then pay annual premiums which they estimated to be $32,000 a year. Their calculations indicated that if they were able to reach the $600,000, which was their goal, $600,000 worth of subscriptions that could be sold, the premium cost on the insurance would be $32,000, and the rest of the money could be used for construction, and this would cover the projected building costs. Their targeted customers were Master Masons and Scottish Rite Masons statewide. Some people looked upon this as a donation, others as an investment, others as just a plain life insurance policy. As mentioned, a subscription unit was $300, but many people bought more than one unit. Now, this subscription could be paid in full upfront, paid in installments of $100 per year for 3 years, or $25 per quarter for 3 years. This proved to be the problem. That's where we'll stop tonight. Next time we'll get so we've got the plan on how they're going to finance the temple. Then I'll tell you about the campaign that they ran, how they got the money together, and then the construction costs, and I think it'll be real interesting.